While the Treaty of Versailles might have benefited other countries who signed it, Germany was at a great loss because of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles signed June 28, 1919 in Paris, France. This is because in the treaty, Germany was forced to financially cover for all of the damages it had caused by sparking the war. Germany lost 10% of its land, all of its overseas colonies, 12.5% of its population, 16% of its coal, and 48% of its iron industry. Due to these reasons, I believe that Germany was at a great loss resulting from this treaty. This documentary is relating to the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. World War I was one of the most brutal wars in the world, coming in at the fourth most brutal war in known history. To bring an end to the war, the Paris Peace Conference brought about the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty was signed by 66 representatives from 32 different nations. The principal countries that were involved in coming up with the treaty were the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Italy. As a matter of fact, more than three-fourths of the clauses of the treaty were solely dedicated to Germany. One of the biggest terms of the treaty was that Germany, alongside Austria-Hungary, was to accept the War Guilt Clause, which was a clause saying that the Central Powers, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, were to accept the guilt of instigating and causing severe damage in the Great War, later known as World War I. Article 160 of the treaty stated that the German military force should be limited to 100,000 men, officers should be limited to 4,000 men, and that the army was bound exclusively within the borders of Germany. Article 165 limited the amount of artillery that Germany was allowed to possess, forcing the surrender of a set of 16 fixed particular warships. Article 168 states that the locations of the factories which produce German war equipment must be known and approved by the Allied forces. These were only some of the limitations that angered Germans, later sparking World War II. Article 188 states that all German submarines and submarine docks were to be handed over to the Allied powers within 2 months of signing the treaty. Article 193 states that Germany has to keep reserved areas clear of mines. Article 45 conditions that due to the destruction of the French mines by Germany during the war, Germany had to turn over her coal mines in Saar Basin, a territory that is near Germany's western border with France, back to France. Articles 81 to 93 declare that Germany had to recognize the independence of Czechoslovakia, Prussia, Austria-Hungary, and Poland. Article 119 forces Germany to give up all of its overseas colonies, which includes those in China and Africa. Article 231 forces Germany and her allies to accept the responsibility of causing all the loss and damage to the Allied forces as a consequence of the war Germany imposed on them. The diplomacy in this situation was not the biggest success. In Great Britain, there was a mixed reaction to the treaty. Most people in the UK thought that the terms should have been a bit more severe. People in France were celebrating that the war was over. However, some French still felt that the Germans were a threat from the East. On the other hand, most Americans thought that the treaty was unfair. They thought that France and the UK were using the treaty as a means to take advantage of Germany and gain profit at her expense. Germany had a very negative reaction. There were protests in the German parliament and streets. Many German civilians were not aware of the harsh conditions that the German soldiers were going through on the field. They were shocked at the terms and clauses that the treaty imposed on Germany. There were no German representatives when the treaty was being written and announced. A lot of Germans considered this an unfair factor and believed that Germany should not have acknowledged the treaty. Eventually, President Friedrich Ebert signed the treaty on June 28, 1919, on behalf of Germany. After Germany signed the treaty, most Germans were devastated at the economic conditions of Germany. Although the Allies had thought they had weakened Germany to its utmost to prevent anything else from happening, they were wrong. World War I French General Marshal Ferdinand Foch said, "This is not peace. It is an armistice for 20 years." A South African statesman named Jan Christian Smuts wrote to British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, "This treatment breeds a poisonous spirit of revenge, which may yet scorch the fair face, not a corner of France, but of Europe." These men are correctly predicting the outcome of the treaty. but would not find out until 1939. The period between both of the world wars was not best for Germans. The treaty had seized Saar Basin and Upper Silesia, which are very important territories to the German economy. All of Germany's overseas colonies were also taken. The Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 to 1933, was already as bad as it was in Europe. Germany was struggling even harder because of its losses due to the treaty.
Those in Germany who attacked the treaty, and certainly radical right-wing nationalists like Hitler made very great play with it. I mean, Hitler in Mein Kampf talks about the chains of Versailles. He talks about how he's going to break it, and in fact, in the end, that's what he does. One by one, he breaks the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles.
During this depressing time in Germany, one party was benefiting. Adolf Hitler was promoting fascism, which became more and more popular with Hitler at the lead. Fascism was a form of nationalism that promoted the lead of one person over everyone else. Hitler had a technique to hype up crowds in animosity towards the Allied powers and the Paris Peace Conference on the harsh conditions that the terms of the treaty had put Germany through. Hitler used this outrage and anger that the German citizens had as a movement to fight back. Hitler roused up the crowds, and eventually the anger had people convinced for revenge. On September 1st, 1939, Germany had invaded Poland, leading France and Great Britain to call war on Germany. The Second World War had begun. While the Treaty of Versailles might have benefited other countries who signed it, Germany was at a great loss because of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. This is because in the treaty, Germany was forced to financially cover for all the damages it had caused by sparking the war. Germany lost most of its land, all of its overseas colonies, and a lot of economic advances. The Treaty of Versailles was a form of diplomacy between the Allied powers, the Paris Peace Conference, and the Central Forces. This institution of diplomacy was mostly a failure. It had devastating short-term effects on German civilians and economy. It had an even worse long-term effect on pretty much the entire world, as it is known as World War II.